They didn't even hear the front door click. No footsteps followed me down the hallway. No voice called out, "Where are you going?" Just silence. And not the kind that soothes. The kind that stings. I left that house with a single suitcase. The one I had bought years ago, thinking I'd use it for weekend trips to the sea. Instead, it waited in the closet for 6 long years. Like me, gathering dust. I was supposed to stay for a little while. After he died, my husband, I wasn't ready to be alone. My son said, "Stay with us, Mom, just for a bit." I didn't argue. What else did I have to go home to? The first few weeks were kind. They gave me the guest room. We had tea together in the mornings. His wife made polite conversation. Their daughter, my granddaughter, climbed into my lap, played with my bracelets. I told myself I was healing. But wounds don't heal in houses that don't want you. Gradually, everything shifted. The smiles faded first. Not gone, just less frequent. Then the doors started closing. Softly at first, then always. Private spaces became off limits. I was careful not to intrude. I did what mothers do. I became useful. I folded laundry, reorganized the pantry, made soup on cold days, dusted picture frames I didn't belong in. I kept busy so I wouldn't feel like a burden. But usefulness isn't the same as welcome. And slowly, I began to feel more like a live-in maid than someone they once loved. I stopped sitting in the living room. They didn't say I couldn't, but the way they paused the TV when I entered said enough. I stopped cooking without asking. My granddaughter stopped hugging me. "Don't bother Grandma," her mother would say. And so she didn't. The kitchen became my territory, not by choice, but by quiet exile. I knew how to move silently, how to put things away without being noticed. I existed like steam from a kettle, visible only if the light caught me just right. They never raised their voices. There were no cruel words, only the slow erosion of presence, of warmth, until one day, I looked in the mirror, and didn't recognize the woman looking back. She was pale, tired, tamed. She wore the same cardigan every day. Not because she loved it, but because it kept her invisible. I started talking to myself. Not out loud, just in my head. Little things. Don't forget the milk. Move quietly. Stay out of the way. I had become a ghost in a house full of life. And somehow, it felt like that was my fault. I began to dread weekends. Weekdays had rhythm. I cleaned, cooked, tidied. But weekends, they were for them. Family trips I wasn't invited to. Movies I wasn't told about. Meals I didn't share. I became something they had to step around. Like a coat rack. Useful in winter, in the way the rest of the year. I remember once, I sneezed during dinner. Just a small thing. And his wife, she flinched. Not from surprise, but like she'd been interrupted. I muttered, "Sorry," as if breathing too loudly was a crime. It wasn't hate. It was indifference. And somehow that was worse. If they'd yelled at me, told me to leave, I could have defended myself. But silence? You can't fight silence. You can only disappear inside it. So I did. I stopped bringing up memories. Stopped telling stories. I held them inside, like smuggled goods. Once, I tried to tell my granddaughter about the time her father fell into the lake when he was 5. He laughed so hard he couldn't swim, and I had to wade in after him fully clothed. But before I finished the sentence, her mother called her to wash her hands. She ran off. And the moment dissolved. That story never returned. My stories had no place there. They were part of a world that no one in that house cared to remember. And I was a relic. Dusty, fragile, unnecessary. I remember one afternoon. I caught my reflection in the glass of the oven door. My back was hunched. My mouth pinched. I looked like someone I would have pitied in my youth. And still, I stayed. Because where else would I go? The apartment was sold. My friends were gone. The world had gotten faster, quieter, and I was afraid to step back into it alone. But fear isn't always enough to keep you still. Sometimes, it curdles into resolve. One night, I couldn't sleep. The walls felt too tight, the ceiling too low. I sat at the kitchen table and thought, if I left, what would happen? Would anyone notice? Would they call the police? Would they worry? Or would they find the note and breathe easier? I waited for the sun. Then I packed a bag. I packed slowly. Not because I had doubts, but because I hadn't done it in years. The feel of a zipper. The weight of things in my hands. The quiet crackle of folding sweaters no one had seen me wear. I didn't take much. A few clothes. A hairbrush. One book I had read a dozen times. It wasn't about things. It was about space. My room in their house had felt like a box inside a box. Walls within walls. But now, I needed a door that belonged to me. Even if it led nowhere special. I left the key on the kitchen table. Didn't write a note. Not because I was cruel, but because I didn't think it would be read. Or worse, read and shrugged off. It was early. Too early for birds, but the sky was softening. As I stepped outside, the air tasted like a decision. Cool, unsure, but mine. I walked to the bus station like I had a plan. I didn't. I had no destination. Only one clear thought. Not here, not anymore. The first bus that came, I boarded. Didn't ask where it was going. Didn't care. I sat near the window. The kind of seat no one else wants. Sunlit and slightly dusty. Outside, the city blurred by. Sidewalks I didn't know. Shops I'd never visited. People whose stories weren't mine. For the first time in years, no one expected me to speak. Or smile. Or pour tea. I was no one. And that felt clean. When the bus stopped in a town I didn't recognize, I got off. There was a narrow street with a faded sign, boarding rooms, by week or month. I followed it. The building was old. 4 floors, gray, with crooked shutters and rusted balconies. A cat watched me from a windowsill as if asking, "Are you sure?" I nodded, even if only to myself. The woman at the desk didn't ask questions. Just looked at my bag and handed me a key. Room 3B. The hallway smelled like boiled cabbage and dust. My room had a small bed, a table, and a window that barely opened. But when I sat on the mattress, it creaked beneath only my weight. And that sound, that single sound, felt like ownership. The first night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear. Out of unfamiliar quiet. No distant television. No murmured arguments behind closed doors. No little footsteps running past. Just stillness. And the odd thing was, I missed the noise. It's strange how we grow addicted to the very things that hurt us. The tension. The avoidance. The background hum of not belonging. It becomes a rhythm, and when it's gone, you have to learn how to breathe differently. The next morning, I made tea. Weak, too sweet. But I drank it slowly, looking out the small, square window. It faced another wall, cracked and water-stained. But I looked anyway. Because it was my window. Because no one would ask me to move. I sat at the table with my book. Read the same page twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because I could. Later, I walked to the market. My shoes pinched. I hadn't bought new ones in years. I passed a shop window and saw my reflection. Not the one from the oven door. This one stood straighter. The cardigan still hung loose, but the eyes inside it had shifted. Slightly. I bought fruit. Not because I needed it, but because I liked the color. At checkout, the cashier smiled. Automatically, probably. But it still counted. She said, "Would you like a bag?" And I almost cried. Because it had been so long since someone asked what I wanted. I spent the afternoon walking with no direction. Past mothers with strollers, old men on benches, teenagers laughing too loud. No one noticed me. And that was okay. Better than being unseen in a place that should have cared. That night, I opened the window. Just a crack. And listened to the city breathe. A dog barked in the distance. A radio played something slow. A couple argued softly below. None of it was mine, but it wasn't hostile. It simply was. I whispered to the room. I'm still here. Not for anyone else. For me. For the part of me I'd buried under politeness, under sacrifice, under fear. I didn't feel free. Not yet. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or speeches. Sometimes, it begins with the sound of a key in a door that no one else has. I didn't expect the silence to be so loud. It had a texture to it. Not emptiness, but presence. Like something watching. Waiting. The walls of the boarding house creaked at odd hours. The radiator hissed like an old cat. Upstairs, someone moved furniture at midnight. Always just once. Never again. And still, it was quieter than where I had been. My phone rang once. A number I didn't know. I didn't answer. If it had been him, my son, what would I say? Would I apologize for leaving quietly? For not cleaning the fridge before I left? For not asking permission? Or would I ask the questions I'd swallowed for years? Did you even see me? Did I become inconvenient? Was my silence the only part of me you loved? I never called back. Maybe I will someday. But not yet. Instead, I cleaned my new room. Not out of habit, out of intention. I dusted the corners. Opened the closet. Hung my few shirts on mismatched hangers. I rearranged the books on the shelf. Even though I only had 3. It felt like carving out a shape in the world. One that fit me, not the role others needed me to fill. On the 3rd day, I opened the window wide. Let the air in, even though it smelled like old bricks and rain. I stood there a long time. Not looking at anything. Just breathing. Breathing is strange when you finally realize you've been doing it shallowly for years. When every breath had been half of what it could be. Careful, contained, controlled. Now I could exhale without fear of taking up space. I made a list that day. On the back of a receipt. Things I like. Earl Grey tea. The smell of old paper. Thick socks. Quiet cafes. People who don't need small talk. Trees. Being left alone, by choice, not by neglect. Laughing when no one expects me to. I pinned it above the bed. Not because I'd forget, but because I needed to see that I still knew how to want things. Wanting is dangerous when you're used to shrinking. At the house, his house, wanting made me selfish. Selfish for asking. Selfish for hoping. Here, wanting felt like defiance. I started waking up early again. Not because I had chores, but because I wanted to catch the morning light. It filtered through the curtain like forgiveness. Soft, undemanding. I drank my tea in bed. I let the blanket stay messy. I listened to the neighbors arguing in a language I didn't speak. And I felt, somehow, part of the world again. Not essential. Not praised. But present. I walked more. Not far, but enough to tire my legs. I found a bookstore, used, cramped, smelling of damp wood and ink. The man behind the counter didn't look up when I entered. And that was a gift. I spent an hour touching spines, reading first lines. I didn't buy anything. But I left with something heavier than a book. A sense of belonging I didn't have to earn. At night, I began writing. Little things. Fragments. Sentences that had waited in me too long. I was once someone's whole world. I wore red lipstick and danced without shame. I used to laugh so hard, I'd choke on tea. I remember who I was before I forgot. I didn't know what I'd do with the words. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Some evenings, I missed my granddaughter. Not the child I saw once a week, who barely spoke to me, but the idea of her. The child I imagined would run to me, arms wide, smelling like crayons and juice. The one who never came. I missed what could have been. That's a grief people rarely talk about, the grief of asterisk what didn't happen. The love not given. The hugs not returned. The birthdays spent watching from the kitchen doorway. But grief doesn't disappear just because it's quiet. It lingers like perfume on an old coat. I wore that coat to the market one morning. A woman stopped me. "Excuse me," she said. "Your collar's folded under." She smiled, fixed it gently, and walked away. And I nearly cried. Not because of the touch, but because someone saw me. Not as a task, not as a mistake, just as a person with a crooked collar. How strange, to ache from kindness after so long without it. Later that day, I sat on a bench in the park. It was warm. Children played nearby. I didn't look at them. Didn't want to. Not yet. But I let the sun hit my face. And I whispered again. I'm still here. Not to anyone else. Just to the woman inside me, who had once stopped believing she mattered. And maybe that was enough. I started humming while I washed the dishes. It startled me at first. The sound felt strange in my own throat. Like something borrowed from another life. But I kept humming. A simple tune, one I couldn't name. Maybe from a commercial. Or maybe something my mother used to sing. It didn't matter. It was mine now. I hadn't made noise just for myself in years. In the house, his house, my voice had felt like an intrusion. Even breathing too loudly at the wrong time had made me flinch. But here, I could hum. Sing softly. Whisper to myself without apology. One afternoon, I bought a scarf. Red. Too red, probably. I saw it in the window of a small shop. Cheap fabric, nothing special. But the color, it called to something inside me. A memory of lipstick. Of turning heads on a dance floor. Of being told, once, long ago, you wear red like you mean it. I tried it on in front of the mirror. It didn't match my coat. It didn't go with my age, but it made my skin look alive. So I wore it out. No one stared. No one laughed. A boy at the bus stop glanced once, then went back to his phone. A woman nodded politely. That's the thing about invisibility. Once it's broken, even by a flicker of color, you realize you never wanted it in the first place. I began walking in places with people. Not to talk, just to be among them. Coffee shops, libraries, markets. I watched the way people moved, the way they laughed too loudly, touched each other casually, lived in the open. And slowly, I started taking up space again. I began to sit in the common room at the boarding house. There was a radio playing old songs. Someone left crosswords on the table. An older man nodded at me once. The next day, he offered me a pen when mine ran dry. We didn't speak, but we existed in the same silence. A warm one, this time. There was a woman on the second floor, Elena. Her laugh echoed down the hallway. I used to find it irritating. Too loud, too free. But one day, she brought me soup. Said she made too much. Said she noticed I hadn't gone out that morning. We sat together, and she asked about my scarf. I told her it was new. She said, "It suits you," and it didn't feel like a lie. That night, I dreamed of dancing. Not with anyone, just me. Barefoot. Alone in a kitchen that wasn't mine. Moving like I used to. Before anyone needed me to sit still. I woke up with tears on my face. But not from sadness. From remembering. The next day, I bought tea I'd never tried before. Something floral and strange. It tasted like spring and regret. I loved it. I also bought a notebook. Not a journal. Just blank pages. I didn't want to document. I wanted to imagine. I started writing things that weren't true, at least not yet. I woke up and smiled before opening my eyes. I danced in the rain without shoes. I forgave myself for not leaving sooner. These weren't lies. They were futures I was building in secret. Words are funny that way. Say them often enough, and they become doors. One day, I opened one. There was a community center not far from the boarding house. They had painting classes for seniors. I hadn't painted in 30 years. But something about the smell of acrylics, the sound of brushes tapping against water jars, it pulled at me. I walked in, signed up, picked a seat near the back. The teacher didn't ask for skill, only presence. We painted apples that day. Mine looked like a lopsided tomato. But it didn't matter. My hands were clumsy, my strokes uncertain. But my soul, she remembered. I went back the next week, and the one after that. Not because I was good, because I was becoming. There was a woman named Teresa in the class. She wore earrings the size of spoons. She asked me once, "Do you live alone?" And I said, "No, I live with myself now." She laughed. But I meant it. Because there's a difference, isn't there? Between being alone, and being with yourself. I had been alone in a house full of people for too long. Now, in this quiet room with bad lighting and peeling walls, I felt accompanied by someone I'd missed for years. Me. I started remembering songs. Old ones. The kind you only hum when no one's around. I let myself sing them while folding laundry, while walking up the stairs, while waiting for tea to steep. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. One day, I passed a mirror and smiled. Not to test the reflection. Not to check for wrinkles or approval. Just smiled. Because I wanted to. And that smile stayed longer than I expected. The phone rang again. This time, I picked up. I didn't plan to. I was watering a plant that wasn't doing well, humming a tune I'd started to like. Then the sound cut through the room. Sharp, sudden, like a name you haven't heard in years. I froze. Let it ring once, twice. On the fourth, I answered. Hello? Silence. Then a voice. Worn, uncertain. Mom? My son. I hadn't heard his voice in months, but I recognized it instantly. You always do. No matter how time stretches. Some sounds are stitched into your spine. I didn't speak. He filled the silence. I didn't know if you were okay. I didn't know if I should call. I still didn't answer. Anna said you left a note. But we didn't find it. Of course they didn't. He hesitated. Emily, she asks about you sometimes. A part of me flinched. Not at the lie, but at the hope inside it. Did she really? Or was it easier to pretend she did? I'm sorry, he said. I don't know. For everything. I sat down. I wasn't angry. I wasn't grateful. I was tired. Are you okay? He asked again. And that question, so simple, hit me harder than anything else. Because it hadn't been asked in years. Not like that. Not with the tremble of someone who didn't assume the answer. I'm okay, I said. And I meant it. In the strangest way. I truly did. There was more silence. But it wasn't heavy. Just space neither of us knew how to fill. Then he said, do you want to see her, Emily? I didn't know. The image in my mind, her small hands, her blank stares, the way she leaned away when I tried to kiss her cheek, that still hurt. But also, she had once laid her head in my lap, half asleep, and murmured, you smell like cinnamon. And that memory clung. I'll think about it, I said. He exhaled, like he'd been holding that breath since I left. I'm glad you're okay, he whispered. And then the line went quiet. I sat there for a long time, the phone still warm in my hand. I didn't cry, not because I didn't feel, but because the tears belonged to another version of me, one who begged for acknowledgement, who measured her worth in glances and sighs. This version, she didn't beg. That night, I took out my notebook, wrote a new sentence. You can care, and still walk away. And another. You can forgive someone without inviting them back in. Forgiveness had always felt like a doorway. Something you opened, waved someone through, and then acted like nothing ever happened. But maybe it was more like a window. You open it, let the air in, let the memories out, and close it again when it gets too cold. I wasn't ready to see them. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Just done. And that, too, was peace. A week later, I got a letter. Real paper. Blue ink. It was from Anna. Not long. 3 paragraphs. Polite. Distant. Something about missing the way I folded the towels. And a line about reconsidering our rhythm. No mention of love. No real apology. But still, an opening. I didn't write back. Instead, I baked a pie. Apple. Bad crust. Too much cinnamon. But the smell filled the room. A neighbor knocked on my door. Asked if everything was all right. Said it smelled like childhood. We ate a slice together on mismatched plates. She told me about her dog. I told her about my scarf. It was the best conversation I'd had in a long time. No past. No obligation. Just two people sharing warm pie and ordinary time. That evening, I looked out the window. Same cracked wall. Same faded shutters across the way. But it felt different. Because now, this small room, this life that was mine and no one else's, it had grown roots. Not deep, not unshakable, but enough. I didn't know what the future held. I might see them again, might not. I might move, or stay. But for the first time in years, my life was mine to shape. And I was learning, slowly, gently, to trust my hands again. I saw her again today, the woman in the mirror. But this time, she wasn't just a reflection. She was *me. Not the version they needed. Not the mother who stayed quiet. Not the shadow who folded towels, tiptoed down hallways, smiled with her lips and cried behind closed doors. This woman looked back, straight into my eyes, like she'd been waiting for me to come home to myself. Her hair is more silver now. Her skin holds time like a worn map. Her body moves slower, but her gaze, it's steady, and something in it shines. Not regret, not bitterness, not even pride, just presence. A kind of peace that doesn't ask for applause, that doesn't apologize for existing. I made soup today, just for me. Too much garlic, not enough salt, but I ate it with pleasure. I turned on music while I cleaned. Real music, loud, messy. Songs I hadn't heard in decades. I danced a little in the kitchen. Socked feet slipping on the tile. It wasn't graceful, but it was real. I wrote another line in my notebook. Today, I lived, not survived, lived. And then another. She is not lost. She just wandered too far from her own voice. I walked to the post office. Sent a postcard to no one. It said, *, in case you forgot, you're allowed to start again. Even now. Especially now. I left the name blank. Maybe someone will find it. Maybe they'll need it. I think about legacy sometimes. Not in the grand sense. Not buildings or books or names etched in stone. But in softness. In gestures. In the neighbor who now knocks twice a week to share tea. In the girl at the corner store who asks how my plants are doing. In the silence I carry that doesn't feel like shame anymore. Maybe legacy is simply the absence of absence. The way someone remembers how your scarf fluttered in the wind. Or how your laughter cracked open the quiet. Or how your absence taught them to notice presence. I don't need a monument. I just need a chair that fits my body. A window with a little light. A voice that doesn't flinch when it speaks. And I have that now. Not every day is beautiful. Some are gray. Some are lonely. Some still ache. But I no longer punish myself for aching. I let the ache sit beside me. Give it tea. Say, I see you. But you don't drive anymore. Because I do. I drive my own days. With trembling hands sometimes. But they're mine. I haven't heard from my son again. Not in a while. That's okay. I don't need to be needed anymore. I want to be known. And if not by them, then by myself. And she, the woman in the mirror, she knows me. She remembers the girl who dreamed too loud. The bride who wore flowers in her hair. The mother who sang lullabies long after the baby slept. The woman who vanished. And then returned. Not to applause. But to * herself. I sit by the window now. As the sun spills across the floor. I sip tea that's still too strong. Wear the scarf that still feels too bold. I hum. I breathe. I live. And I write one last line in my notebook. She didn't run away. She came back to where she was always meant to be.